thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Our subject for today is insurance insights for lead generation professionals. I'm so excited here to have Blake Israel with us to go over this topic. Before we begin, just a friendly reminder that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the QA section, and we're going to answer them shortly after the presentation. A recording of this webinar will also be available 24 hours after this webinar session. So to begin, I really want to introduce our guest, Blake Israel. Blake is from SLB Insurance Group out of Coconut Creek, Florida. He has 7 years of insurance experience and is an expert in guiding individuals. Blake is an avid golf player as well. We're excited to have him present today. Without further ado, I'm going to let Blake take it from here as he has some slides to show you and go through some of those insurance insights that we talked about before.
Thanks, Jackie. Everyone on the call, I appreciate you taking the time to hear what I have to say, and hopefully what I have to say benefits you and helps you learn a little bit more about cyber and TCPA coverage. Jackie, I'm kind of having trouble sharing my screen. Can you see it or no? Is it not coming through?
Not yet. Let me try to work on that. Go ahead and try sharing now. Thanks everyone for your patience as we kind of get our presentation up. Blake.
It does, but when I'm hitting share screen, it's weird.
There we go. Perfect. And Blake, you're muted, so if you want to unmute, that should be good.
How's it now?
Perfect.
Sorry, yeah.
No worries.
So yeah, first I wanted to speak about cyber in general, because I know a lot of you are, you're here for the, TCPA, and you know how important that is, and it could be a big scare. But you can't have, the TCPA coverage without cyber. So it's built into the cyber, also tech, and it could be also a few other lines of insurance, which I'll get to that later. But I first wanted to just in general talk a little bit about, cyber, because that's what you really need, cyber coverage, in order to have, the TCPA. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit here. So the main concern about cyber is, having data stored, having cyber attacks, probably for you guys, regulatory fines if the government will put on /big fines on you if you do allow any customer data out, whether it's credit cards, emails, kind of any sensitive data to, personal information. They'll put big fines on you. Second, if you do have some sort of breach, you'll lose your customer trust, whoever that is, whoever you're, getting the data for. One breach, they'll probably not going to work with you again. And then second, you'll lose business income. Your operations will be shut down for, could be 1 week, could be a couple months. So cyber, it will and can cover, business interruption costs. So some of the number one way to get breached and hacked is phishing. And basically that's an email either sent to you and an employee, and looks legit, and you click on it and it's malicious software files, and 90% of breaches are through phishing and emails, and they're all done by employees just not paying attention, being careless, and you click on it, and once you click on it, they're in, and it's pretty much over with. And then once they're in, that's when the ransomware, starts. They basically will hack your files, shut you down, and until you pay whatever they ask for, you're not getting anything back. And then data breaches, again, going back to the sensitive data, once they breach, there's the sensitive data, client data, the personal identifiable information, credit card, social security numbers. And then once that happens, that's when, you can get, civilly sued. The government could come after you. And again, having cyber in place can cover those costs. And more importantly, all these cyber companies, that they have all the top lawyers on call. Basically, they have the FBI on call. So instead of not, if you didn't have coverage, you're going to call 911. They're not going to tell you what to do. Instead of calling up the hotline and immediately they know what to do. They're in your computer, trying to stop the fire and whatever's going on there. So I think the number one reason why any lead generation company should have cyber is just the amount of data they're dealing with. They're dealing with all customer data, whether it's emails, marketing, just any kind of customer data can be breached. And then you guys are also, some of you, probably all of you, are using third-party software, third-party data, which you guys really don't know what's going on in the back end of that third-party data. You don't know how well it's, if they have anything implemented to safeguard it. So you using that data, you're basically blind, going into it. And having coverage can, if there was a third-party attack, you could be covered for that. And then everything's just digital nowadays. Everything's computer, email, technology. So it's more than ever is, when we need this kind of stuff. Just circling back to the big picture of cyber, covering data breaches, ransomware, any regulatory fines, costs, penalties. That's probably the biggest part, because they cover defense, could cover defense costs, legal fees. But at the end of the day, if you don't have coverage, who knows how big these fines can get. They could reach up to 6 figures, depending on how bad it can get. And cyber coverage can cover those regulatory costs. And also reputational damage, that's a big factor. And it's a little bit harder for carriers to pay out on this, because you kind of have to prove the damage and the customer you lost, and maybe the income you lost from that customer, but they will pay out for basically reputational damage. And then business interruption, circling back to that, your business could be shut down for you don't know how long, and the policy will cover up to maybe 3 months, some say, depending on the policy, but it could cover a good amount of time. Here's just kind of an example of I'm sure this is a lot bigger company, but this one's with 10,000 employees. They get hacked, phishing email, they get into the software. These hackers, bad actors, will, based on the size of your business revenue, employee, they'll come up with a number that'll justify, like, oh, what are they willing to pay? So in this case, they think this business can afford $500,000. So they'll say, we want $500,000 until we give you basically the key back to your systems. You hire an attorney, lawyers, that's going to cost another 200,000. Business interruption, just say 4 weeks. So this can add up to, for a big company like this millions of dollars this will add up to. And then basically they're saying about 85% of that cost can be covered by insurance, sometimes more, sometimes less. But it just shows you how important insurance is, and you might never need it, but if you don't have insurance, this could possibly shut your business down, and you can't come back from a loss like this. It might be a little harder to see, but I wanted to kind of give you guys of what a policy, what a cyber policy looks like. In this case, I think this insured had like $1 million revenue, good sized company. They're paying for $1 million limits, which is pretty standard. They're paying about $800. So a lot of this, you're not paying that much. It's worth being covered. $1 million limits, $800. It's not that bad. And this is only cyber. I'm going to get to the tech E&O part, which in a little bit, which will also cover the TCPA. but this one's just cyber, and just to throw some coverages out there that it's covering. Funds transfer fraud, which if you guys aren't familiar with that, it's basically, if someone were to send you like a bad check or a bad invoice, and you were to pay that thinking maybe it's your client, or vice versa, they're thinking it's you. That's something that they can cover, which I think is pretty important, for your industry. Reputational loss, I spoke about that. Breach response. So anytime they have to respond, that's up to $1 million limits. They're going to cover that. Media coverage, regulation defense, breach response, extortion, business interruption. So just kind of wanted to give you what a kind of like a deck page would look like, and what some of the coverages on here look like. So now getting into the tech E&O part. So the TCPA can fall under cyber, which is more ransomware, getting attacked, phishing, kind of that part. And then the tech E&O is more of the services that you're providing. So it's something you're actually doing. Cyber, it's out of your control. Technology E&O is something you're providing. So copyright infringement, that's a big one. Obviously accidental, because none of these coverages are going to cover willful act, which I think I mentioned in the next slide. But this is all for all unintentional acts. These companies aren't looking to cover things. If you're doing something wrong, they're not going to cover you. It's for honest, errors and omissions. So breach of contract, for you guys, if you promise your client this, and this, you're going to get them this many leads, you're going to bring in this much business, and then you fail to do so, and then they sue you. They promised me all this, I got nothing. That's something that could possibly be covered under a tech account, which kind of falls under misrepresentation. If you misrepresent, not on purpose but on accident, and you think you promise your client stars, and you really think you're going to get him leads, money, whatever you do, and you fail to do so, that's something a tech can cover. So specifically on the Telephone Compliance Protection Act, TCPA, there's actually a few lines of business that this can fall under. So, which it's a lot, because each three, usually tech, and cyber fall under the same policy. You can package that. The D&O, which is directors and officers, usually is like its own coverage. But basically the D&O would cover it covers directors and officers. So basically the owners of the company, and it would cover any, bad financial decisions, including, a business decision that violates the TCPA Act, that could kick in. So you really kind of need all three to feel like very secure. Then again, the tech, is more just negligence of the product you're offering. And then cyber is more of the privacy. You kind of, don't have, there's really nothing you can do other than implement software, MFA, kind of those kind of things to prevent that from happening. So yeah, I would recommend all three of those. The D&O obviously covers other things than just the TCPA, any financial decisions, things like that, bad business making decisions that can ruin a company, can cover you. Yeah, and then specifically, I'm sure you guys, are familiar with the TCPA, but I looking through, before I did this, I looked through like what are some things that, that like the top 5 times people are being sued for. And I actually came across a stat. It was the number 2 claim in all of the US, basically, lawyers filing claims was TCPA acts, because it's just so prevalent. If they do file a claim, it's probably because it happened, and they're just so strict on it. It's kind of like, when a few years ago with the ADA, like it was just lawyers were just eating it up. And that's kind of how it is now. So the government's just so strict on it. But it includes stuff like unsolicited robocalls, text messages, if they're on a do not call list, if you got a call within like a certain amount of hours, the workday, like auto dialers without consent. So there's like 20 different things that can fall under this TCPA, which it's hard to follow. You're trying to make money and get your clients these leads, and maybe cut a few corners, and then all of a sudden you're falling under a TCPA act, and something like that could potentially be covered under your either the cyber, tech or D&O policy. So some of the key takeaways is cyber it's so important to have, because it literally can shut down a business. There's all these other claims, general liability, property, you get hit and you have to pay, and you're back on your feet. Cyber can literally shut down your business, and you can't open up. It's just so different than any other claim. And the other thing, having this coverage, again, like I said, you have basically experts on speed dial. If you even think there might be a claim, you call up the hotline, and they're ready to go. They have people on speed dial. So you're dealing with experts who deal with this, 100 times a day, just helping people with their claims. So I just think it's worth, the $1,000, maybe $2,000 to, make sure you're fully covered and not potentially lose your business, your reputation, and your career. So I think that was it.
I had a couple questions for you, Blake. And while I'm asking those, feel free, if you have any specific questions on the 3 types of policies that we covered, definitely put them in the chat, because Blake can kind of go into detail on any of the questions that you have. One of the questions that I had for you is in terms of business downtimes. This may be a little bit specific. You mentioned some, like it could cover up to 3 months. When it comes to businesses and these downtimes with cyber attacks, how often, what's the general downtime that you're seeing with these businesses?
So some of these attacks, basically, it's whenever they want to pay. So a lot of times they're requesting, like, just say $20,000, and they'll get you back up and running. They basically have like a key, and they'll get you back up and running, get your files, your email back. Like sometimes you don't even have access to your email. Some of them could be a week, which could whatever you're making a week, could be 2 weeks, could be 6 months. I've seen it all. It just depends if you're willing to pay right away, and I guess if the carrier is willing to pay, it kind of, they negotiate with you, the carrier, the insured, sometimes if the FBI gets involved. So it all really depends. I would say the average is probably like 3 months, so that's 3 months of revenue that you potentially could be losing out on.
A significant amount of downtime. Thanks for answering that. I also have another question for the audience. One of our audience members says, so cyber coverage includes TCPA ? Or is there a separate TCPA coverage? Can you kind of elaborate on which policies cover TCPA versus which ones may not?
Yeah, so there's no like just TCPA coverage, like that's just not a thing. And again, it's difficult coverage. It's not just easy walk in the park. There's really no other thing I could think about that can potentially fall under like three classes of insurance, which I mentioned: D&O, E&O, and cyber. So it's very tricky, just considering everything. So to protect yourself, I would definitely get the cyber and tech E&O. That's most likely what it's going to fall under. And there's just so many gray areas that are outside of our control, that it just comes up to how it happened. If the TCPA was maybe triggered by a ransomware attack, cyber attack, then it would fall under the cyber. If the TCPA was triggered by something you did, unintentionally, then it would be triggered by the tech E&O and fall under that. If it was triggered by a decision by the director, the owner, it could fall under the D&O. So you need to have cyber. Cyber's kind of the root of the coverage. And then if you want to spend a little more, you get the tech. A lot of times it's combined. So it's, you really don't have tech D&O. You can have cyber, but you can't have tech D&O without cyber. And then D&O is separate. You can have, your own D&O coverage, which again, recommend, but it all comes down to what you're willing to spend and the risks you're willing to take. So back to it. Yes, you need to have cyber, full cyber, to have the TCPA built into that coverage, basically.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for elaborating on that, because I do think that cleared up. And to that audience member, if for some reason that didn't answer your question, feel free to let us know in that chat. We want to make sure that that's clear to you and have that answered. While we're waiting on that, can you talk a little bit about willful acts and how that's determined versus non-willful acts in your experience?
It all goes back to the claim handler from the carrier, and basically, who's working on the claim adjuster. And again, it could be, could be a gray area. And that's why, when you do get this coverage, you want to be with a reputable company and maybe A+ rated. If you guys aren't familiar with, insurance companies are rated on. So you want to maybe spend a little bit more to have that extra, rating and a carrier that's willing to pay out claims and isn't afraid to, dish out $100,000 to cover their client. So, I mean, an easy willful act would be like, hey, let's send this mass text out to 10,000 recipients that are on and they know they're on maybe a do not text or do not call list. So they're basically blatantly disregarding the TCPA Act and just doing whatever they want. That's something it's just, you're blatantly doing it. So it's not something that, again, that would, again, if you have coverage, you'll probably still get defended by the carrier, which is always a good thing. They're always going to jump in and hire a lawyer. And so you'll have attorney fees and stuff like that helping out. But if they actually have to pay out and they can prove that you blatantly just disregarded the act, they're probably going to decline the claim. But again, they're still probably going to cover you with lower fees, and you guys know how much that could add up to. So even if you did it, they potentially could still help you with covering costs and stuff like that. So
that is an interesting benefit that I, didn't even think of. When it comes to, you mentioned having an A+ carrier. So that's one of the considerations. I have a follow-up question, but we had an anonymous individual reach out, and this is their question. So want to make sure we get through this. I had reached out to different business insurance providers regarding TCPA. And when I asked if they could include TCPA coverage with general liability insurance, they all got back to me after 24 hours after checking and mentioned that this isn't included. They're okay with general liability, but specifically TCPA, they didn't want to do it. So
correct, yeah.
With that, we want to make sure that can be included with the policies that you mentioned, or how does that differ from general liability insurance?
Right. So general liability is, think of it as slip and fall coverage. It's covering some services you're providing. This has really no business being in a general liability policy, which, they need, whoever that is, reach out to me and I could kind of put you in touch with an agent that knows what because if you don't know what TCPA is, some agents, they have no idea what it is. It's just not meant for them. So you need to find an agent that knows cyber, knows tech, knows what TCPA is, and has access to markets like me, who can offer that. Some people, they don't even know what it is, so they're not going to be able to offer it to you. So you just have to find the right agent and make sure they understand what it is, and they'll be able to get it to you. And it's hard. It's a hard class of business to write. And not many people do it. It's very niche. So you got to find the right people. And if you reach out to me, I can help facilitate that.
And just so we know, we are going to be putting Blake's contact information in the follow-up recording, as well as the email, so that if you do have any follow-up questions, or perhaps you're trying to be connected with an agent in your area that does cover these specific things that we talked about before, we want to make sure that you have that connection point here.
Yeah, so
Uh,
I just to mention, so I'm like a wholesaler. So I work with the agent and carrier. I'm like the middleman. So if you guys want to email me, I'll be happy to go back and forth with you and help you out. But at the end of the day, I would put you in touch with, we write in all 50 states. So whatever state you're in, it doesn't matter where. I could put you in touch with an agent that essentially might come through me to help you get that coverage.
We talked a little bit about what a cyber plan looked like under a certain amount of individuals per that plan. When it comes to cyber, techie, and the owners, officers, what if you were to get all three of those or break down the costs for the other two types of policies? What does that look like, just following similar model per month?
Yeah. So it's hard to package all three a lot. There's very little companies willing to do that. But the tech, and cyber, you could package that pretty much all the time. Something like that, just say, go back to like maybe 1 million revenue, maybe 5 employees, something like that. The cyber might be run you around 1,000, and then packaging it with the tech, maybe another 1,000. So maybe 2,500, something around that price. And then if you're looking for just D&O for something like that, again, maybe not too expensive, maybe another 2 grand if you want. Then that would be a separate, and it's covering so much more than just the TCPA. You're getting so many more benefits, so much more coverage, but that's included in there. So I don't understand when companies making good money just don't spend the extra 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 just to make sure they're safe and they could sleep at night.
And that's a bigger thing, is just having business continuity, especially with the markets. We already have a ton of pivots in lead gen, but as businesses start out, and the money that can scale up so rapidly, for just a simple, TCPA violation or something, even farther expanded, maybe there's a multiple TCPA violations, that stops business revenue. So we ultimately wanted to make sure that our audience and our customers were educated on, what can we do to continue to build a shield around. Maybe there are some things that, as you mentioned, like willful acts that, don't always cover that, but to continue to build your shield as you essentially protect your business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's more than just like insurance. Insurance is great, but also, teaching your employees about this. Not letting them, like for example, our company, they'll send us a fake email and basically testing us if we're going to click on it. And if you do click on it, they'll be like, this was a scam, from it was a fake scam, but this is a scam, and like they'll give you like another test. So they're always doing things like that. And just knowledge and understanding and employee. Again, usually the owners know what to look for. It's the employees. If you have 1 or 2 employees, it's letting them know and giving them the knowledge how to prevent stuff like this, and just letting them know about the TCPA and stuff like that.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to spend some time going over this coverage. Again, want to make it clear that we're going to be putting Blake's contact if you have any additional questions that weren't answered here in the webinar, or maybe you chew on this a little bit and there are some questions that you may think of or brainstorm about.
Yeah, any questions, you have my email, just shoot it to me and I'll be happy to answer. You give me a call. I don't know if my number's there, but definitely happy to answer anything.
We'll also have this recording available 24 hours after. Again, Blake, thank you so much for the time that you spent today going over insurance and how we can, again, continue to build that shield with our businesses and lead gen.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. We have one more question before I
All
end
right,
because
go ahead.
we put it in there. Are we going to discuss TCPA in general as well, or was this just about cyber insurance? So this webinar was specifically about insurance policies surrounding lead gen individual us. I think that's a great idea for a future webinar to go over to the TCPA.
Well, but again, it's in order to have TCPA, you have to have cyber. So it's kind of all built around cyber. So actually knowing the law is not my expertise, and knowing like every single thing you can't do. But I do know it's built into the cyber. So that's kind of my stance on it.
Absolutely. And we're happy to put that into future webinar ideas in terms of bringing a legal expert on to discuss that TCPA, what unfolds under that. And essentially, as Blake mentioned, there's many parts of it, and it can get complex, but we ultimately want to bring a legal professional when we talk about anything TCPA. Beyond that, like I said, just wanted to make sure I covered that before I wrapped up the webinar. Again, thank you so much for your time and have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.